Oh, oh. Good evening and welcome to the
Pause.
Two Lanes episode number 58. I'm Ron,
I'm Shane.
and I'm laughing because the record button wasn't
Oh yeah, I seen it.
threw the timing off a little bit.
Good
Okay,
stuff.
well, let's get started here as we always do. Go find us on YouTube. Channel is Slot Racer. You can see all 58 episodes that we've done so far and some how-to videos and some other special interviews with guests and things like that. Find us on Facebook, like the page. You can comment there. We always have a secret word on every show, and you can comment it there or wherever you find the shared post for the episode that is current. And the race results for last weekend, September 15th and 16th,
Yep.
2018, the winning report. I'm going to start off with the Southern Retro Rumble, Fast Eddie's Slot Cars and Raceway down in Pinellas Park, Florida. And in the GT1 Coupe class, GTC, Danny Zona was your winner. Mike Brissett was second, and Aaron Rothstein was third. In the stock car portion, which they ran on the oval, Rick Moore was the winner, with Jeff Bonanno second, Jay Gard third. And in the F1 race back on the hill climb, Mike Brissett was the winner, Danny Zona second, Aaron Rothstein third. And in Can-Am, it was Danny Zona, the winner, along with, I know TQ and new track record as well. I don't know if there's track record for laps or not, but Danny definitely clean swept the Can-Am class. Jeff Bonanno second, and Mike Brissett was third in that class. And I think, pretty sure that Jeff and Mike was only separated by a couple of sections for second and third. So a lot of good tight racing down there last weekend, and not a huge crowd, but it was a good sized crowd. But I think, every announcer are going to do it again next year, so I think it'll grow with time. So
Right, that'd be cool.
Become a traditional event. Yuska was at Mid-America in Bloomington, Illinois, and in the Indy class, John Vincent was the winner, Toby Kindig second, and Scott Morgan in third. In the production class, Bill Sabinik was your winner. Toby was second. Scott Morgan was third again. 4.5, Bill was the winner again. Jeff Strauss second. Toby in third. And in Can-Am, Bill made it like the trifecta win.
Yeah.
By win his third race of the day. And Toby was second, and Jeff Strauss was third. The Midwest Flat Track Series had one of their Sunset 240 Enduro races, which are 4 hours long, at Chicagoland Raceway, and they ran on the Fiedler Flat Track. And the winning team is in the middle. It's John Miller and Ricky D. The second place team on the left, Dale Leip and Jim Kreider. And your third place team on the right, Bernie Schatz and Chuck Gambo. And John and Ricky only won that race by one lap after 4 hours.
Close racing.
Yeah, and I think Bernie and Chuck were 20 back. So from Chicago, we go out west to Buena Park Raceway in Buena Park, California for the Phoenix 500. As far as I could find, they only raced 2 of the 3 classes that were scheduled. So in the Phoenix class with the 1337 gearing, Joe Chevy was the winner. Eric Claiborne was second, and Rich Kernut was third. And in the open gearing or unlimited gearing class or portion, Sam Rackham was your winner. Rich Kernut was second, and Andy Stapers was third. Retro East was at Speed Zone in Mount Holly, New Jersey. In the F1 class, Keith Libby was your winner. Pat Skaggs was second, and Chubby was third. And in Can-Am, Keith Libby pulled off the double, the sweep, with the winning in GTC. Excuse me, they raced GTC, not Can-Am. So Keith Libby was the winner there. John Gorski second. Pat Skaggs was third. In Ohio, Retro Series got started off with their first race of the series at Mark's Model World, Canton, Ohio. No photos of any podium finishers. Can-Am, Willie Kessler was the winner. Bud Barlow second. Rick Bernardo Jr. third. And in F1, Rick Bernardo Jr. was the winner, with Greg Mayer in second and Bud Bardos in third. The Ohio Challenge Cup OCC Series got started off this weekend at Fast Tracks. Newark, Ohio. Fast Tracks in Fremont, Ohio. Wow, too many ends in there. In the GT1B class, Chris Earnhardt was the winner, with Dan Halfhill second. Joe Gersiner was third. In the GT1 class, I was the winner with Dave DeCoster second. And Elmo, well, you know what? This is the Group 10. This is the Group 10 podium, excuse me. I was the winner in Group 10. Dave DeCoster was second. Rob Bosco was third. There is the GT1. No, you know what? That's Group 10. Let me back up. This is kind of a weird picture because, no,
that's a GTP body. That's a B3 body.
Yeah, that's the GT1. But Elmo was actually third, not that Elmo wrote down. I'm pretty sure Elmo was third because Rob had some problems early in the race. But anyway.
Yeah.
So then in Group 10, I was the winner. Dave DeCoster was second. And Rob Voska was third. That's a definite. And I was asked to put on the Fiesta hat, which I gladly did. And then GTP, I was the winner with Jim Pace in second and Dave DeCoster in third. So that is your winner chicken dinner report. And speaking of winners, we're going to have some drawings later. We have some gifts or prizes or whatever you want to call them from Mid-America Products and Pro Slot. And we'll get to those a little bit later in the episode.
Sunday.
I was wondering how long I was going to have to wait.
Well, sometimes you do stuff in between, so you know.
It's all good. I'm just giving you a hard time.
We're both off. We didn't have our nap.
My timing is definitely off today. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Anyway, so
we're excited. We're going racing this weekend.
I guess. So this weekend, the AWRA is at Hobby Max in Durham, North Carolina. And the Flexi Fiesta is at Mid-America. And Shane and I both are scheduled to attend. September 29th is the Retro Summit BRS season kickoff at Mark's Model World. And the New England Retro Racing Association starts their series. And signups are currently open for the 2018 Flexi Flats, November 16th and 18th at the Slot Car Track Concord. And I guess all the tracks survived the inclement weather in the South and North Carolina region of the country.
Everything is good.
Everything is good. Shane survived. He was bored out of his mind, but
it gets rough down here.
Didn't get the weather that was anticipated, I guess we'll say. So
a little bit of wind, a little bit of rain, but nothing to rather safe than sorry. I didn't have to break out the helmet or the floaties.
Okay, so on the move this week, this is a picture from Atlanta Slot Car Raceway, formerly known as Cordell Model Speedway. It's under new ownership.
They did a lot of work.
Yeah, well, I've never been there. I guess you've been there, right?
I've never been there. I've just seen pictures. When I seen that picture, I was like, wow.
Okay, so yeah, they're in the middle of, like, I guess cleaning up, repainting. I know they repainted the floor because someone made a comment. Floor looks great. I'm going to assume they probably painted the walls as well. They're working on the track a little bit, kind of just refurbing the facility, we'll say. So it's looking good down there.
Oh yeah.
And they're not really on the move, but
Facelift.
new ownership and a major cleanup. So,
Oh yeah.
and these are pieces of Shannon Connor's old King track, and that has been sold to Bryant Robertson, who in the past owned Victory Lane Hobbies in North Carolina in the 2000s, in Midway, North Carolina.
I didn't even know that.
Oh, okay. Well, I didn't either
Yeah.
till one of our viewers, Danny Hamby,
Mm-hmm.
gave me some information. Thank you for that, Danny.
That's cool.
This is what the building looks like on the outside. They should be open mid-October in Mocksville, North Carolina.
Do you have any pictures of the King track actually set up, or was that the only one?
That's the only pictures I have been seeing. Yeah.
Yeah. Because they have a page, I think it's like hard body or triad hard bodies.
Right.
And they got some current and updated pictures of it. And I think there's a live video of him like walking through the building itself.
Okay, I haven't seen that. So before we go get in the Wayback Time Machine, also some on the move comments. Tri-State Raceway in Middletown, Ohio has officially closed. The King track has been sold. It's going to Michigan. The drag strip has also been sold, and from my understanding, it's now owned by Innovative Slots in Indianapolis, Indiana. They already have a drag strip in place. I have no idea what they're going to do with this one, but that's where the drag strip went. And Rapid Raceway in Plainville, Connecticut is also now closed. And I believe that their hill climb is still for sale and available if someone is interested in that. So, last week when I went to the race at Fast Tracks in Fremont, Ohio, I had talked to Rob Vasca on the phone a couple of days before the race, and he had recalled that a couple episodes back I had mentioned old car model magazines and stuff like that. So he said he had some. He was going to bring them and give them to me, which he did. He gave me a little plastic bag that probably had, I don't know, I didn't count them. I'm going to say 6 to 8 issues of old magazines from the 60s. And when I got back here about 10:30 at night, was still a little wired. Sat down, pulled the magazine out of the bag, and I just kind of like really quickly kind of was glancing through a couple of the magazines I've seen in the past. There was a few that I hadn't ever seen, I guess, or I don't remember seeing them. So anyway, this is the February 1966 model car and track. It's not car and model, but model, car, and track. So back in the day, there was like 2 or 3 different car model. There was car model, car, and track, and then there was like model car science, and some overlapped. And so anyway, I'm sitting there and I'm glancing through these, and in this particular issue, I ran across an episode, or I ran across an interesting article that we will now go back in the Wayback Time Machine and talk about. So, any idea who this gentleman is, Shane Parents?
I have no clue.
If you'd have showed me his picture a week or 2 or whatever ago, I would not have known who this is either.
It's kind of small.
Okay.
I'm doing this on my cell phone.
Well, there's a bigger picture. This would have been a few years after the other picture. Okay, so this is a gentleman named David Rosen, and it's a name that I don't think too many people that have been involved in slot racing for a zillion years have probably even knows or is familiar with. I sure wasn't. David was an American businessman who became the chief executive officer of a Japanese video company in 1965. He served in the United States Armed Forces, I believe it was the Air Force actually, and remained in Japan after his discharge in 1954. He founded a company called Rosen Enterprises, an export company that sold Japanese art to America. So like he would buy Japanese art from artists or whatever, and
Right.
then export them to America. And that's kind of how he made his living. So that's what he did. In the 1957, he was importing Photorama photo studios. And you know what I mean by a Photorama photo studio? Like, because we're two different generations. When I was younger, you would go to the mall,
Okay.
you could go to the mall, and you could
Right.
get in the photo booth and put a quarter or
Mhm.
50 cents in and get your pictures taken.
Right.
So,
Okay.
so he was importing those to Japan.
Okay.
So the Japanese people could use those to have their photos taken to prove that they lived in Japan or whatever. Like they would have to have
Gotcha.
photos. So
Got
and he also imported coin-operated games from America into Japan.
hmm
And one of his biggest clients was the U.S. military. So he would bring in jukeboxes and pinball machines, and they would put them on army bases. And of course, then there was arcades and things like that in Japan,
Right.
and that's kind of made his business bigger. So back in 1940, so now we're going to go way back. There was a company named Standard Games. It was a coin-operated game company in Honolulu, Hawaii. They provided slot machines and other coin-operated machines to U.S. military bases in Japan, like during the war, after the war, etc. So they imported from or exported from Honolulu, Hawaii into Japan. So in 1951, the United States government outlawed slot machines in U.S. territories, and so then they sent two of their employees to Japan, because that's not a U.S. territory, to set
Right.
up, like a location in Tokyo to import to and sell in, further sales into Japan. So that happened in 1952. So the company provided, like I said, coin-operated games to U.S. bases in Japan, and it changed its name from Standard Games to Service Games of Japan. Okay, so when you put together the SE from Service and the GA from Games, you come up with Sega. Okay, so Sega is born. Okay,
hmm
so this continues on until 1960. Okay, so like Sega makes their own slot machines in Japan and some other coin op stuff, and they were making like little jukeboxes, mini jukeboxes, like in 1960 in Japan, and then they were used in Japan. Even though while this is going on, David Rosen is importing jukeboxes and pinball machines and things like that into Japan. So in 1960, Service Games was formally dissolved. And a few days later, two new companies were established to take over its business activities. So one company focused on manufacturing the Sega machines, while the other company was the distributor and then operator of the coin-operated machines that Sega was making. Then those two companies merged in 1964. So in 1965, Rosen Enterprises, they merged with that new company, and it all became Sega, and David Rosen became the CEO of the merged company, or he became the CEO of Sega. So Sega is, going pretty good. 1965. Like I said, they're making games, plus they're importing games, they're distributing games. They're building up a pretty good business in Japan. So in 1966, they came out with this catalog, or here's a copy of a catalog from them in 1966. And, here's American, Williams pinball machines, Bally pinball machines, Chicago Coin. Then there's arcade games, like the old rifle in front of the thing you shoot at the targets or moving stuff in there. There's your jukeboxes. Most of the jukeboxes were Rockolas. And then they also imported the bowling machines. Okay, like you remember these?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or I guess kind of like skee-ball.
Yeah, it's like skee-ball, but the pins would come down from underneath like the counter, and you roll the ball down there, and they'd go up. And
gotcha.
This was one of my favorite games when I was younger. Like I love the bowling arcade game. So anyway, that's kind of stuff they're importing. They also offered what they called like a lawn ornament, which was like I don't even know what scale, probably quarter scale or larger train that you put tracks in your yard or garden and you could run around. But at the bottom of the catalog on the last page was they were importing slot cars and slot car parts from the United States. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So in 1966, Sega got big into slot cars. Sega was almost like the American Raceways of Japan because they were building tracks and setting up raceways. I think some of the places they owned, like they would go out and rent a building, fill it with a slot car track or tracks, put in arcade games, and sit back and collect the money. So they even set up an office, which I believe, that's the Sega Enterprises showroom, and they had like an economy 60 feet track, and this is like identical to what American Raceways did in the United States in Beverly Hills, California. They had a showroom where they had a track or a couple. Well, actually, I think they had 3 tracks in their showroom. So anyway, in I got to find this in this article. We had it marked, but I lost the bookmark. Okay, so it says that Sega was 750 employees in a modern factory complex near Tokyo's airport. It was very shortly to be erecting between 10 and 15 model car racing circuits a week. They also went on to claim that Sega Enterprises predicts that Japan will have 500 circuits, tracks, in operation before the end of 1966. He predicts the boom will shortly spread to the Philippines, Free China, Hong Kong, Thailand, Malaysia. His forecast may not be too optimistic as new records are being broken every month. So this is another Sega. They call them circuits, but it's a track. But right. The Sega Shinsake circuit says 3-track layout. I can only assume they had 3 tracks in that particular facility. This is another track, 160-foot track. They said this was a Grand Prix event. And then, of course, this is Osaka circuit. It says 350-foot track. So I'm going to assume again that that was a Raceway arcade that had 3 tracks in it. And the Japanese had their own organization. It was called the Japan Model Car Racing Association, which would kind of been like the American Racing Congress. And they had their own rules, and they had their own regulations and rules and things like that. So, earlier I should have said 2 things happened to Sega in '66. One was slot car racing. They got into slot car racing in a big way, making tracks, opening raceways, importing stuff, distributing the stuff they imported. So it was really big for them in '66. And they still had their coin-op business, like they had all this going on. So while slot car racing kind of died in Japan starting in '67 through '68, slot car racing still continued. A lot of it was on military bases where tracks were at. And this is a race report, a part of a race report and a photo from the 1970 car model race that took place on a military base in Japan. So there was some organized racing still going on. But according to Wikipedia, and I just found this when I was kind of trying to put all this together.
Right.
According to Wikipedia, slot car racing became popular in Japan in the 1960s, and tracks could be found at game centers, bowling alleys, and such. According to that page, the market soon crashed due to it being too difficult for beginners to get into the hobby because of quote-unquote maniac hobbyists. I think we would fall into that category. And children couldn't easily join due to the high cost and it being judged as a hobby of low morals because many adults were gambling on races.
Funny.
Don't know how much of that's. I mean, I know that it's hard for kids to get into the racing and stuff like that. I don't know about the whole gambling portion of it, but in Japan. But yes, in several, some of us slot racers have some moral issues. No problem with that. I would probably be one of them. So the second big thing that happened for Sega in '66 was they came out with this game called the Periscope. And again, I don't know if you're familiar with Periscope, but I'm not sure I ever played on Periscope. But this was the first arcade game in the United States that cost 25 cents to play. Okay, so in 1966, I didn't know what arcades were anyway. So I'm going to assume they were a time to play, okay? But Sega come out with this Periscope game. You look down, it was like you were in a submarine with a periscope, and you would shoot at targets. And it was really revolutionary for the time because, it had all this sound effects and visuals and, I think the machine rattled a little bit or moved like when you shot a torpedo, and stuff like that. So I don't think I ever played on a Periscope game, but I played on games that were like Periscope, like in the early 70s that were probably made by American companies. Because I can remember doing the Periscope thing. And I think Seawolf was one. I think there was the Hunt for Red October.
Right.
I think there was a third version of a Periscope type game. So this was a big thing for Sega, and it shot them into a whole new industry, which, slot car racing died. They didn't care. They had this. And they kept building on that. So, in 66, 67, they went from importer to exporter. You know what I'm saying? Like they started making games and shipping them to America. And so then things were going good in 1970. And here's another picture of the Periscope game. There's the Sega logo, the old Sega logo. And then in 1970, they sold out to Gulf Western, which was a big conglomerate corporation in America. And they went on to video games, okay? And like they had a version of Pong. I don't know if you've ever seen the old Pong game that you'd play on a TV at home. It was like the first video game we ever had for home. And it was made by Atari. But Sega made a Pong version for arcades, big machine with a big screen and two players could play. And then into the early 80s, and I know you have to be familiar with the game Frogger, right?
Frogger?
Frogger. Yeah, that was a Sega game.
Yeah, I had a Sega when I was a kid.
Oh yeah, so at that time, back then, I mean, you had Frogger, you had Centipede, you had Pac-Man, Mrs. Pac-Man. I mean, there was a million of them. I mean, because I can remember video arcades becoming huge, like around 1980 through 82, and the video arcades would be full of video games. And like 5 years prior to that, I can remember going to the arcades at the malls, and everything was mechanical. It was like pinball machines and like mechanical type games. that had things that moved. And I remember one of my favorites was like a drag strip game where you sit in a bucket seat and there was a car inside the glass and a Christmas tree, and you had a four-speed shifter and
That'd be
gas
cool.
pedal, clutch, and brake, and So, like I said, that was more mechanical than video. So,
Right.
Frogger was a big hit for them, and of course, in the mid '80s, they got into the home console market, home games. And
Hmm.
of course, they went on to what they're probably best known for in the last 20 years, Sonic the Hedgehog. So that's the Sega story and slot cars and their connections. I don't think they had a very long period of time, let's say, in slot car racing, probably a couple of years. And they went on to bigger and better things. And of course, became a multi-millionaire, probably billion-dollar corporation
Yeah.
over the years. I mean, they went through some bankruptcies and some other changes in sales, and David
Right.
Rosin is still alive. I believe he'd be 85 years of age today. He lives in California. He was a longtime CEO of Sega. Um, so there's some more slot racing history, and this time on the other side of the pond, as we would say. But
Right.
yeah, I just think it. Like I said, when I was going through that article and I seen the like that guy's name, and I thought, well, is this the Sega?
Right.
And I looked him up, and oh yeah, he's and it just more I dug, the more fascinating the story became. So, if anybody wants to know any more about Sega, I mean, it's a really interesting history outside of slot cars.
Right.
But you can just Google Sega history and just start reading some of the links, and it's just an interesting story. How
So I remember when you were talking about it, I was like, yeah, I know Sega, but I always knew them as like the video games.
right? I never knew they had a connection to slot car racing,
Yeah.
and I don't know many people did. And I think to me, what also was fascinating was I don't know if they knew about American Raceways and what they were doing and copied them, because
Right.
American had a couple-year head start on Sega doing the track thing. But there's a lot of similarities, and I don't know of any American Raceways track ever being shipped to Japan. Like I don't know of any American, like obviously there was never an American Blue King track that I know of, or a Purple Mile, or an Orange, or a Yellow. I'm not saying there wasn't. I just
Right.
don't know about it, and I've never read about it.
Right.
So, I mean, American was too busy, or pretty busy, keeping up with North America and Canada at that time to be worried about sending stuff to Japan. But I guess if there was an order placed and
Right.
it was paid, they would have done it. But I just don't know of any American tracks ever making it into Japan. So, and I will say this, by looking at those tracks, had Japanese racing continued on with all those flat tracks, those guys would have been pretty good ISRA racers
Yeah.
with all the flat tracks. So,
Because I noticed that about the pictures, a lot of them are all flat.
yeah, they were all flat. Everything.
Is there any flat track racers that go to Israel that are from Japan or that
No.
area? No.
No, not currently, and not that I know of in the past.
Right. So that's pretty interesting.
So last Thursday, I believe it was, last Thursday or Friday, we learned of the passing of Ray Gardner. Ray Gardner was pretty much a slot racing icon. He was a ballroom dancer and a romancer, we'll say. A lot of good stories about Ray Gardner out there. Ray started out slot car racing in Indianapolis, Indiana, just a stone throws down the road from the Anderson Between the Lanes studio here.
Yeah.
And, Ray started racing in 1959 on basically homemade. The first track he ever ran was a plastic track in some guy's garage. And after a few weeks of that, the guy decided, well, I'm going to build a wood track. And he built a wood track. And after a couple of races, as we both know, the racing bug bites you, and it bites you pretty hard. And Ray continued to race, so Ray, in his own right, became a pretty good local slot car racer. And then company he worked for, he went on the road a lot, so he got to visit a lot of raceways. And in 1966, his job sent him to Atlanta, which was the headquarters for Champion Slot Racing Products. And Ray made a phone call and got invited to come over and take a tour. And one thing led to another, and Ray wound up getting hired by Champion. Okay, so he goes to work for Champion basically kind of as the art director, and then winds up becoming a team champion factory racer. Okay, so this is a picture of Ray like in I think this came out of the 1975 Champion catalog. So, so Ray, raced for Champion. Ray was doing all the catalogs, the ARCO newsletters, helping promote the ARCO 33 races, going to the ARCO 33 races and representing Champion. He was kind of, just a Champion employee and team racer and employee. And so, here's some examples of Ray was a super talented guy. Okay. An illustrator, extreme. You got to remember all this is done before there was computers to do this stuff on. But, you look at this and you look over to the right and there's a picture of a Can-Am car, number 95, and it's running on a track. It's a slot track. It's got a slot there in front of it and what looks like braid. And, that's all hand drawn and shaded. And, it's just amazing. It's art. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. That's art. And Ray did that kind of stuff. And this is the 1968 ARCO rules, which he was the illustrator. That's Formula One car, similar to the retro cars today. And there's a stock car, the side view of a stock car, and then they come in and you got to have numbers on the roof and the side.
Right.
Here's a roll cage you got to have, it's required, and tire diameters and all that stuff. And there's a Can-Am car telling you what you can and can't do with the body and some dimensions, and the front end of a stock car. That's just more illustrations that Ray did. The 1972 catalog. I always thought that this Can-Am car, to me it looks like the old McKee Can-Am car, but I'm not certain that's what it is. But it reminds me of McKee, the way the fenders are and the way the back of the body is. But that again, that's more Ray's work, his illustration abilities. He was involved with the Champion was heavily involved with the NCC, the National Competition Committee, which was kind of like the USRA back in the day. It was kind of, I don't want to say it was a competing organization, but it was more of a, USRA was racers, run by racers. The NCC was a committee of manufacturers. And from the NCC, and again, this will be a future show, from the NCC is where we got like the Group 12 and the Group 15 and the Group 20 classes, which were based on maximum dollar amounts for a ready-to-run car. Group 12, the whole car couldn't retail for more than $12. You had $12 or less, and it had this type of armature with these number of turns and wire size. Group 15 was the same thing, had to be $15 or less, so forth. So, of course, Group 7 was unlimited open. It always has been. It always will be. But so there's a little bit better picture of that illustration. And I think this was 74, 75, and it says C powered by Champion, which at that time Champion was heavily into the C game motor market, promoting C cans, and then at some point Champion started calling their magnets ARCO magnets. I think that started back in the 60s, but they were always known as ARCO magnets, and then of course their race series was called the ARCO Racing Series. So. And this is kind of funny because this is out of the, I believe, the 75, 76 Champion catalog. So you got a picture that Ray's drawn here, and It says, I know the bicentennial. I know it's the bicentennial, meaning the bicentennial race that was coming up in 1976. The 1976 USRA Nationals that was hosted by Joel Montague of Cayman at his raceway in Hyattsville, Maryland back in the day. And it says, but would someone tell that Noose that that's not what I meant when I told him to set up the guide flag? Okay, so they're referring to Noose, Joe Newmeister, the retro body painter, who also sits on the IRA board of directors, because Noose was nicknamed by Bob Rule at a race. I believe it was in New Jersey, and Noose was pretty fast and everything, but he kind of ate it in the race, and Bob Rule said to him, called him Noose. He says, because you noosed it in the race. So that's right. That's where the Noose moniker came from for Noose. So I don't know if Noose was racing for champion. I know that Noose was racing at this time back in New Jersey. I don't know if he was racing for champion or had some support from them, or maybe he was painting bodies for him, but there is a reference in the catalog regarding Noose. And then this was on the Wheels and Tires page, and it says, look, Noose, I don't care what Emmett says, which Emmett was a East Coast, well-known, legendary East Coast chassis builder who we lost a couple years ago as well. I don't care what Emmett's, look, Noose, I don't care what Emmett says. Eighth scale tires do not fit, meaning slot car, and they put eighth scale tires on them because they were starting to make RC stuff. They were making RC stuff.
Gotcha.
But kind of, I don't know if they were digs or stabs but they're kind of humorous,
right.
Really Noose. So, Ray made this book, I think back in 2000 or so. 50 Years of Fun. They were available at one. Bob Rule was selling them for Ray on eBay years ago. I've got a copy. It's just full of race stories. Ray, when I say Ray, I mean Ray. It's full of race stories. If you ever get your hands on a copy, it's full of lots of champion history, racing history, not total overall. Just Ray would say, "Okay, we went to this race."
Right.
So Ray was known. He was a contender. He wasn't like a solid race winner. The only big race that Ray won that I know of and that he even speaks of or ever spoke of was the Hinsdale Arco race in Hinsdale, Illinois, in, I believe it was 1967. So that was Ray's kind of one and only big win, claim to fame back in that time. And this is a shot from, I believe, the Arco Nats, the second Arco Nats was held down in Atlanta. And what's interesting about this story, I told you Ray was from Indianapolis.
Mm-hmm.
And, he moved to Atlanta, 66. The gentleman here on the left is Bob Kennedy. Bob Kennedy was a racer from Indianapolis, Indiana as well. Bob Kennedy raced with Ray when Ray lived in Indianapolis. Ray moves then to Atlanta. Bob's still in Indianapolis. Bob always stayed in Indianapolis. But Bob wound up racing for Team Champion. And Bob Kennedy was a very good racer, and he won lots of tri-state USRA races in the Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky tri-state region back in the day. And it's interesting how this all kind of ties in. So back in that time frame, Randy Marshall starts racing in 1966.
Right.
And in a few years, he is Bob Kennedy's protege. And Bob and Randy went to a lot of tri-state races. So Ray talks about in his book how in 1973 they were having a race down at Grand Prix Cincinnati. Well, I'll take it back. It wasn't Grand Prix then. It would have been Dell's Raceway, which was owned by Bob Haynes of REH Distributing, and probably ran by his father at that time. Because when Bob had the Raceway, his dad ran it for a while, and his son, one of his boys ran it for a while. And I don't know which one was before who, but I know that it was still called Dell's in 1973-ish. So Ray and Bob Cozine, who was the team champion, hot dog, big racer. I think Ray got a hold of Joel at Cayman, and the connection there was that Joel bought motor parts, cams, in-bells, armature blanks from Champion, wound the armatures, made Group 7 motors, because back then, Group 7 motors were C-cam motors. We didn't have little mini motors and strap cams. And so Ray arranged for Joel to have cars for both Ray and Bob to come race, even though they hadn't raced in like 3 years. It was one of those deals, just bring your controllers. We'll have everything here for you.
Right.
So they go there. They're practicing, whatever. Bob Kennedy shows up. I know Randy was with Bob. Bob Kennedy pulls out 2 slot cars out of his box, and it was nothing that anyone had seen before. Here we had slot cars with 2.5-inch high side dams. Now, side dams have been used before, but they were only like 1/8 inch, 1/4 inch, excuse me, maybe 1/2 inch tall down the sides of the cars prior to this day. But Bob Kennedy took it to the next extreme and had these giant 2 to 2.5 inch tall side dams on these cars and diaplanes on the front, and proceeded to kick ass with the car. Okay, so Ray writes in his book that, it was just unbelievable. Several years ago, I discussed that matter because Randy had always told me this story.
Right.
And, excuse me, but when you hear it from someone else, you get like different perspectives.
Right.
So I had talked to Joel about it a few years back, and Joel says, yeah, he says, I can remember looking at his cars and shaking my head and saying, there's no way that's going to work. And then after the race, Joe says, I sat there for a half hour looking at these cars.
Right.
And like, how did this work? And why does this work? And after that, the 2.5 inch high side dam thing was it. That's what, and then, USRA, of course, came in and made a height limit.
Right.
That still, those same rules from 1973, 74 are still the same side dam rules that they have today. So, it's kind of interesting how there's this connection with all these people, Ray and Bob and Randy from Indy, and then you got Joel and you got Bob Haynes who owned the Raceway. And, it's always cool how this always intertwines a little bit with what happened back in the day. So, Ray went on to become a Raceway owner. He opened Bullet Raceway in the 90s. I believe it was the early 90s, I believe, is when Bullet opened. Ray was instrumental in the starting of the Parma Challenge Cup Series prior to my joining Parma. Like the year before, Ray was in charge of that. And then I came on board, and then pretty much it was just me after that, up until I left Parma in 94, and it continued with like Steve Kemp and Rob Garland for a while. And so he had the Raceway. He also started the AMSRA, he started the ASRA, which was kind of like the Parma Challenge Cup down in Georgia, which then Terry Kelly took over and I believe changed the name to AMSRA. And the AMSRA, AMSRA was kind of non-existent, the last 5 years or so?
The last Nats they had was the one I went to, and that was 2012. And as far as like races, I could tell you the last AMSRA race.
Okay, so like I said, 5 to 6 years ago was kind of like the last Nats.
I mean, Ralph may know better as far as the race at a Raceway, but as far as like their Nats that they had, it was 2012.
And then while Ray had the Raceway, he also was very instrumental in the beginning foundations and formation of the Track Owners Association, the TOA. He was pretty much the secretary. He wrote, I think, every newsletter they ever produced for a period of 6 to 8 years, maybe. And I mean, Ray did, he typed most all the articles in those or the reports, and laid out the photos. Worked with the printer publisher. Yeah, I mean, the guy had just tons of talent, and that went back to his service in the Army. Like he used to bang a typewriter for the Army, back in 1947, 48 or something. Or no, not that early, but when he was in the Army, he was kind of involved with some kind of publication at the base he was at or whatever. So Ray spent a lifetime in front of a typewriter or a keyboard, and he also played the piano and was kind of a part-time piano player. I mean, if he knew someone that had they might say, hey, come down and join us Saturday night. He'd show up wherever they were playing. He'd tickle the ivories, as they say. And
right.
He was also a ballroom dancer, and he went to work for Arthur Murray for a while. He was a certified ballroom instructor, and he did that for many years. And up until his passing, he was still active in that. I mean, I don't know. He moved to Florida at some point before the TOA, before either he left the TOA or the TOA disbanded. He was in Florida and was active in the ballroom dancing deal down there, teaching and going and doing it. But this is a picture from, I think it was 2000 is what the caption said, oh no, actually, I'll take that back. 1985. This was Ray teeing off at Pebble Beach on the Monterey Peninsula in California. And Ray liked golfing. And I don't know if I won't say he was an avid golfer, but I think he was a pretty good golfer. And I think this is how Ray would just want to be remembered, that he has went off. He had a great life. He had a lot of fun. Kind of got to do what he wanted to do on his terms.
Right.
And, now he's off golfing and dancing and maybe stock car racing. I mean,
all right.
As we say, we want to believe there's a slot car track up there somewhere, and there's all these great guys up there. And sadly to say, Ray's up there now, and yesterday they were joined by Bob Haynes, and Bob Haynes owned REH Distributing. REH Distributing was established in 1964 and has remained in business since 1964. Bob Haynes, like Ray, started out racing on a home-built track in someone's basement or garage or whatever in Cincinnati. The racing bug bit him pretty hard. I remember Bob told me that, I asked him one time years ago how he got started in slot car racing, and he said that a friend of his had built a track, went over, played, got hooked. Then they heard of a commercial raceway up in Lakewood, Ohio, which is up by Cleveland. So on a Saturday, they got in the car and they headed up to Lakewood, Ohio, and he said this was like the hugest, biggest track. He couldn't believe how big the track was. It was this monstrous 124th track. He didn't remember, if it was an American track or not, or if it was homemade, but it was just way bigger than any. And they were racing 24th. They were racing 132nd down in Cincinnati. And now he was really hooked. So they went back to Cincinnati and he built a bigger track. And then, of course, Raceway started open in Cincinnati. And Bob decided to become a distributor of slot car products. And, REH was formed in 1964. And, Bob seen it all. I mean, he's seen the boom. He's seen the crash.
Yeah.
He's seen the struggles. He's seen everything. And I mean, Bob was a major player in keeping slot racing going after the crash, 67, 68. I mean, A lot of distributors went by the wayside. A lot of manufacturers went by the wayside. But he was always there promoting slot car racing, helping people open raceways. He got into 132nd cars, HO cars, which then opened up a bigger market because, one time there was 3,000 to 5,000 slot car tracks in America to sell to.
Right.
And soon there's not many. And then, well, I can sell a HO and stuff into the hobby shops, which there's 3,000 to 5,000 of. So yeah, he made some really good moves. And then as time went on, he bought out a lot of manufacturers that, were shutting down. And we're going to go out of business. We've got molds, equipment, we got inventory. Bob would go in, buy it for pennies on the dollar. It's useless stuff, but there's still a market for some of it. Some of the machinery can be used to make newer, better stuff, improved stuff. So not only was a distributor, he was a manufacturer as well. He had like the American line products. At one point, he bought the Lancer molds from the Lancer Body Company. He bought like Dubro molds. He bought all the old Cox spur and crown gear tooling. The list goes on and on. I mean, he bought up every 36D motor that was in existence to be bought up. And they still have thousands of them at REH. So, I mean.
You got any in the museum?
I don't think, actually, I don't think I own a 36D motor.
I get you one now, put it in a museum.
Oh, yeah. I mean, but, it's like they're not really rare. I mean, there are some rare 36D motors.
Right.
Okay? But as far as just to say I have a 36D motor, yeah, I mean, be no problem getting one. But I don't have any really rare ones. But not that I collect them anyway. So, and he, he's just got a lot of old vintage stuff down there. There's tons of stuff that has been forgotten about or people don't know about. So it just kind of sits there. But I think over time now, that will change. I think that REH is going to start doing a lot more promoting. REH is going to continue on. It's not going to close anytime soon. I don't think pretty sure it's not going to be put up for sale anytime soon. Bob was active in the business up until probably a month ago. I mean, he would go down there 2-3 times a week and work. Of course, there were some things he could no longer do. But he was always there to help Kim, who's pretty much run it the last 5 years or whatever, with business decisions and moves. And I have no I guess problems or concerns about REH's future. I think that it's in good hands and things hopefully will continue on, and they like I said, they will continue on. So but yeah, Bob was a super happy-go-lucky kind of guy, one of the friendliest guys. I mean, I can remember, I didn't even know who Bob Haynes was one time, and then I was at the 87 Nats, and I'm just standing there watching or something, and he just comes over and starts talking to me, we have this really good conversation, and but after he talked to me, he would go talk to somebody else, and like I say, it was all about promoting slot car racing, and I just remember at the 87 Nats, and it was me and a friend of mine from Fort Wayne that raced. He's no longer with us, but we went and had breakfast with Bob Haynes and Ken McDowell, who owned Parma. Okay, so we're just two slot car racers. We don't know these guys.
Right.
It's like, they invited us to have breakfast with them because they knew we had been at the Raceway. We were waiting to be seated at this restaurant, and I think they were standing there waiting too. And they're like, "Hey, why don't you just join us?"
Yeah.
Okay. So that was when I met Ken McDowell and Bob and got to know Bob. We sat there and bounced ideas off. Ken was always looking for new product ideas. What should we be making? What can we be making? And I gave him some ideas of stuff they could make. And, Bob's just kind of like, yeah, that'd probably sell, because if you make it, I'll distribute it, and
Yeah.
then there was times they would talk business that we
Right.
had no clue about, so it was kind of interesting. And I remember, like, this is 1987, so Bob and Ken were like early to mid 50s, okay, and I'm 24, 25 years old, and I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, okay, here's these two old guys,
Right.
okay, but they were my age. They were my age that I am now, okay. So
Right.
I'm 24, 25, and I'm sitting there thinking, here's these two old guys. They can't do what they're doing forever. Someday
Right.
someone's going to have to take over,
Right.
do what they do to keep slot car racing moving forward. And yeah, of course, they both had children that have,
Right.
kind of stepped up and kept those companies going. Some will argue with how well those companies have been kept going, but hey, it is what it is.
Right.
And I just remember, that wasn't the day I said, "Oh, I want to become a manufacturer or distributor." I never thought that. It was just 3 short years later, I went to work for Parma, and that had nothing to do with that breakfast that we had in 1987.
Right.
When I reconnected with Ken a couple years later, he didn't even remember me or remember me from that breakfast. Okay, so that breakfast never led to my future position at Parma, but it was just here's these two guys, and someday someone's gonna have to carry on what they're doing, and
Right.
now neither one of them are are with us, and so excuse me, so that was just 30 years ago, basically, that
Right.
and them guys were in their prime then, I'm saying, and now here we are 30 years later and they're no longer with us, but
Right. Well, it's like we all go out to dinner. You've
Right.
heard me tell people all the time, hey, come out to dinner with us. You'd be surprised what you can learn and stories you'll hear.
Oh yeah, I think the sad part about slot car racing is we don't have that great of a social aspect. Like, we spend more time worrying about racing
Right.
than we do the social aspect of it. So,
Mhm.
here's another picture of Bob and his wife Darlene, and in the middle is Mr. Gonzalez, who was the owner of Gonzalez Distributing, which was sold and became it was sold to the guy on the East Coast. I can't think of his name. I can see his picture. He's no longer with us either, the guy who bought it, but he owned Raceway. I think it was called Raceway Distributing, or maybe it was USA Distributing was what it was called. And it was I think it was Joe Adamo. No, not Joe Adamo. God, his name escapes me at the moment. But anyway, he had a Raceway, and then he bought the distributorship from Gonzalez. Gonzalez moved to Florida and kept his Lionel train portion of the business distributorship. And so there you have it. That's the end of that. But back to the social aspect of it. Yeah, going out to dinner after the races or after testing on Friday.
Right. That can sometimes be funner than the races themselves.
Exactly, and more entertaining.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's where
I've always told people, probably what you're about to say is the racetrack, everyone's focused on racing, getting their cars figured out.
Right.
Like me and you'll cut up, me and Bobby, the kind of group guys will kind of cut up.
Right.
You know what I mean? But then it's like, I've had numerous people tell me, you're totally different going out to dinner. And it's like, because, it's like when I'm at the racetrack, I look at it as a job.
Well, I'm going to sum it up. I'm going to sum it up and say more enemies are made at the racetrack and more friendships are made after the race and the dinner, Do you agree with that?
Oh, yeah. Because, there's been plenty of times guys were just like, this guy's a hoot.
Right.
You know, you don't say nothing at the racetrack. You know, he's like half the time you don't even know he's there.
Yeah,
you know,
you take him out and feed him and don't have to put any alcohol in him, and he's a hoot. You know, like,
yeah. So,
then there's some guys you get alcohol in them and they really get to be a hoot. But
yeah.
so I don't mean to end on a sad note, but Bob Haynes, I got posted earlier. I mean, so much knowledge, history, gone, but so much service provided for so many years to the industry. So,
Oh yeah.
like I said, he was one of the major players in keeping it going for so long. And REH kind of dropped out of the commercial raceway end of the distributing. I mean, they were a major player like in the 60s, 70s, early 80s, but then you had other distributorship start form,
Right.
get a little more aggressive, use more up-to-date technology. That's one of the things that REH, not a bad thing, but they still
kind of kept it old school
in the past in some things.
Yeah.
Not that hurts things.
Right. Sometimes that's simple and easier.
Right. So, but it's their system. But but they turned their focus to HO and 1/32 home set rates, and that always, that's always been a bigger market than the 24th commercial stuff. So,
right.
And it's hard. It's very difficult to stay on top of all those three different types of slot car racing. I mean, you need to have a person for each division to stay on top, be number one.
It's almost like a full-time job, the way everything's evolving and changing and stuff.
Right. Yeah, because there's just so much information that happens so fast now. So,
especially with technology now.
Yeah.
It's like cell phones. You get a new cell phone comes out, seems like every month.
Right. Right.
So
I think we will do some giveaways now.
We got some goodies.
Yeah, so so we got two Mid-American Allen wrenches.
Those are nice. I have one.
I have one too. I've got a broken one too.
That reminds me. I need to get a tip when I'm up there.
My racing partner got a little too aggressive with it one day and snapped the tip off in the wheel. So we're going to give away two.
It wasn't me.
No, not you. We're going to give away two Mid-America Allen drivers, and we're going to give away a Pro Slot T-shirt from Pro Slot.
Extra small?
Huh?
Extra small?
I think it's any size. Whoever the winner is has to tell John Miller,
yeah.
Hey, I won the T-shirt on between.
That'd be me as a gag. Yeah, you want a T-shirt? That's it.
Like this size. So let's pull out a Allen driver winner, and that would be Tracy Brown. Wins a Mid-America, Allen driver. Come on. Now we'll give away a Pro Slot T-shirt, and the winner of the Pro Slot T-shirt is Todd Oswalt, which I believe is a drag racer. But I'm not 100% sure on that. And the last Mid-America Allen driver will be John Bud Green.
Yeah, I was going to say that name sounds familiar.
Yeah. So John Bud Green, that's one guy, and Tracy Brown.
You ever hear the story about?
Well, hold on. You need to contact Mid-America, Roger, for their Allen driver. Mid-America Allen driver. And Todd Oswalt needs to contact John Miller at Pro Slots. I just blew on the floor. Pro Slots T-shirts. And I thank John Miller and Roger Schmidt. Roger owns Mid-America Products. John owns Pro Slot Products. Thank you for your donations. And they call me and say, hey, or they send me a message, hey.
Right.
So if anybody else wants to give stuff away on the show, just let us know, and we're more than happy to give your stuff away.
Free advertisement.
Free advertisement. So you're going to tell us about Bud Green?
Yeah. You ever hear the story about the body sucker?
This sounds familiar, but I'm not 100% sure. Go on.
An older racer that used to race with us told me, he was like, yeah, we were at a race with him. I think it was a retro car, or a retro race. And it was a 4.5-inch cars. And the body was like all crunched in.
Okay.
You know, most people sit there and they fumble with it and they're massaging it. They were like, oh, he just picks the car, sucks the body, and just pulls it out and sticks it back on the track. So they call him the body sucker. I was just like, all right.
Okay, so like, does he suck on the body?
Yeah, on the body. Just sucks on the body. Like, gets a suction, pulls it out. And,
so he puts a lip lock on it.
And then I'm thinking there's no way. And then when Ralph had the Outlaw Series race.
I'll say, did you see this happen?
It happened to my car.
Wow.
I came off and, like, someone heavy-handed it. And then, like, it sucked. It didn't handle it. It came off in his corner. He's like, I'll fix it. And he like, dude, I about lost it. I looked at Bobby, and I remember Bobby was racing. And he just said, the look on your face, it's like, what the hell did he just do to your car? You know?
Well, see, now, you want to talk about funny stuff. I'll tell you about the silicone sucker.
Silicone sucker.
Well, okay, so when I started racing, our track, we didn't allow tire glue, kind of didn't know what tire glue was.
Right.
We put oil wintergreen on our SBR foam rubber tires, soften them up, clean them, action.
Right.
So the older guys, they knew and they used silicone tires because silicone coated tires,
right.
not solid silicone tires.
Right.
Foam tires have been silicone coated, hooked up extremely well on slot tracks that use wintergreen oil because, you know, we put rubber on the track.
Yeah.
Okay. You would create a buildup of rubber because of the wintergreen on tracks.
Right.
But they were black. You could never see this. I mean, if you got down and really looked, you could see the haze and
yeah.
And we never cleaned our tracks, which I'll tell you another funny story about cleaning the track. So we raced on this track for over a year, never cleaned it. But silicone coated foam tires would really hook up good on that wintergreen base or that wintergreen rubberized base that was on the track. So the problem was that none of the old guys wanted to get rid of their, like, you got silicone, you got any more of those? No, we don't have any more of those. They all lied. I mean, they all had, but they didn't want to. Yeah. So, because they were a big advantage. At the time, REH sold American line silicone-coated foam tires, which were the old white circle tires from the 60s, which they had a patent and everything on silicone-coated tires, which someday on the show we'll talk about that. and Bob Haynes made those tires because, well, I think at that time he was probably buying them from White Circle, and they were just repackaging them under the American line name. And eventually they were making them in-house at REH. But anyway, so those would work, but they weren't as good as the older. And I think it had to do with the silicone was aged on those 60s silicones, where this new stuff we were buying in the 80s wasn't. It was just different. And maybe it was a different silicone even. I don't know. But they were better than running SBR foam.
Right.
But they weren't as good as the old silicone tires. So I get an old pair of silicone tires. And, I mean, they were brand new, but I got some. And this guy, Dave Sorg, who was like the first ASA stock car champion, won the Winchester Dry Power 400 the first year and the third year. And I actually worked on his real race car at that time. So, but we weren't real buddy at the track, you know. So I've got these silicones, and so I'm sitting there in my stock car box, and he kind of taps me on the shoulder, and he says, "Here, you're going to need this for your silicone tires." And he hands me this brown like cough syrup bottle, And he says, just wipe this on your tires and then wipe it off. And I go, what is it? And I'm sniffing it. And he goes, well, go ahead and take a drink. I said, what is it? And he goes, it's not going to hurt you. Just take a drink.
Right.
And he wouldn't tell me what it was. So I kind of like put some on my finger and I kind of,
Yeah.
I think it was castor oil, but I don't know because I never had castor oil in my life.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've heard of it. Yeah.
Right. But people later said, well, they would clean their silicone tires with castor oil, amongst other things. So we had these two guys that raced with us that didn't have them, and they were the hot dogs that everybody wanted to beat, but we were kicking asses. They didn't have those tires. They finally get some old silicone tires. But they didn't have any what I would call dope to put on the tires. No one was
doping their tires.
Yeah, they had no clue. What to use on it.
Yeah.
So one day we're at the track. It was an afternoon, weekday afternoon. We're testing. One of these two gentlemen are at the track. He's practicing testing. He's running his car with his silicones. He was an insurance salesman. He's in a suit, tie, dressed really nice. He was kind of, good-looking guy and everything. I mean, he was kind of a player back in the day.
Right.
And I can remember there was like these pretty attractive mothers in there with some kids, and they were kind of checking him out. And he was totally oblivious. And they're kind of watching him, and he's running his car. He stops, picks it up, and he licks his silicone tires with his tongue.
Right.
So, not really the tire sucker, or the silicone sucker, but he was the silicone tire licker. But that's how him and his partner would clean their tires. And I'm thinking, why don't you just use water? Like, why would you?
Yeah, or just lick your finger or something.
Which are pulling off the track. But it was just quick to go. So, yeah, that was quite a sight. And years of laughter provided after that.
Glad. Yeah.
So body suckers and tire lickers and.
Oh my.
I'm sure we'll come up with a few more someday.
Oh yeah, there's so many different things.
So that's kind of all I got for this episode number 58.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
good history.
Good history. And it's kind of a tough secret word to pick this week.
But that's why, like, when you were talking, I was just like, wow.
So I think what I'm going to do, what I thought of earlier, to pay tribute and pay respects to both Ray Gardner and Bob Haynes, I think we will do REH ARCO.
Sounds good to me.
Cool. So, secret word, words, letters,
right.
REH ARCO this week. And that's all I got. I'll see you this weekend.
Wheels up at 6:30, I think.
Okay.
So I'll probably be sitting at the door waiting on you.
Oh, you will be. Because I have no idea what time I'm going to get there Friday. So.
No, I think they don't hand motors out until motors and tires at 12.
That's okay. I can get there at 3, and I mean, what's going to?
I mean, I think.
Yeah, I guess as long as I'm there by 6, I think 3 hours is enough to run the motors and tires in. So.
I mean, being that I went to the Flexi Palooza because I always get the Flexi Flats. I learned a lot. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like I didn't have to ship as much stuff because it was like, all right, do I really, and then just, I guess now that I have kind of one under my belt, I know kind of I have a better game plan.
Right.
So it just happened to be that the flight, because I don't like doing layovers. I like to get on the plane and go straight there.
Gotcha.
This is only my second time, so it's just like, I'm still kind of, so.
Right.
And it's like, well, I should get there right as he opens and then kind of hang out and get set up. maybe go get something to eat from somewhere or something, and then get the tires and motors, and then really start going at it.
Well, if you can get Roger to buy you lunch, have him take you over to Maxwell's.
Maxwell's?
Maxwell's Beef.
Maxwell's Beef?
Yeah.
Do they deliver, or you have to go there?
You got to go there, I think. I don't think they'll delivery.
No.
But Roger loves it, so maybe.
Gotcha.
Our worst case scenario, maybe.
I want to go to the one place.
What time I come up, maybe me and if Terry comes with me, maybe we'll stop because he likes that too. Stop,
right.
We'll get something and we can bring it over.
Yeah, just shoot me a text or call.
We'll figure it out.
Gotcha.
All right, so we're gonna close episode 58. We will see you next week for episode 59. Congratulations to the winners of free products tonight. And the secret word is REH ARCO, ARCO. And everybody have a good weekend. Have a safe weekend. You have a safe flight.
Oh, yeah.
And we are out.
See you later.